Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we're all on this journey. And we talked about Mary last week, and we saw what she risked. She was a character of risk. She risks everything. Her family's reputation, herself, so she can carry the gospel, as our choir so wonderfully sang for us last week. Mary the first to carry the gospel. There was a line in the anthem they sang this morning about Jesus, Son of Righteousness. Did you hear that? Righteousness. This word defines Joseph above all others, righteousness. It's a unique kind of righteousness. It's not simple law-abiding. It goes above that, this kind of righteousness. When we talk about Joseph, though, you never really talk about Joseph without Mary, do you? I mean, Joseph kind of always comes along with Mary. And it's kind of like Forrest Gump's Jenny and Forrest, peas and carrots, right? You following me? You with me? Okay, good. Just want to make sure you're with me this morning. Hey, we don't know that much about Joseph, do we? I mean, we know he's from Bethlehem. We know he's a carpenter. But other than that, it just seems we're reading between the lines a little bit here, aren't we? And there's so much about Mary. Mary has a full song, a Magnificat she sings. Joseph, not that much about him. I like to think about Joseph in this particular time and place that Jack read for us. It's unique. What we know about Nazareth and Bethlehem, there's a 9-day walk between the two. It's interesting to think about, isn't it? That Mary and Joseph, they actually had a long-distance relationship. Some of you may have been in long-distance relationships. If you know this, I mean, they can be painful at times. They can actually, it's a cliche, but it's true, make the heart grow fonder. I like to think of Joseph in this long-distance relationship. Now, some people think of Joseph perhaps being older, some think of him around Mary's age. But can you imagine him traveling from Bethlehem to Nazareth to go see Mary? He has to go see her to bring her back for the census that's happening in Bethlehem. And on the way, he's got 9 days to think about. Can you imagine the butterflies in the stomach? What is he going to say to her? I mean, he's got all the time to think about the hopes of the future for his family. He's got a family to raise now. And then he's got to also think about the challenges of that. I mean, he's a simple carpenter too, you know. And some of you fathers have probably had this worry. Am I going to have enough to feed my family? And Joseph's thinking, am I going to have enough to make tables? And I mean, is this going to do it? All of this is on him. We're going to sing at the end of worship today, O Little Town of Bethlehem. It's a sweet hymn. It's beautiful. There's a line in it, though, that just speaks to Joseph right here now in this moment. It says, the hopes and fears of all the years are with thee tonight. Joseph has these big hopes for the future because of this deep love he has for Mary. And imagine, all that's going to come to this challenge and this news he's going to receive. We don't know how he learns, but the woman he loves is with child, and it's not his. The hopes and fears of all the years are with thee tonight. Think about that for the moment. The ache that must be in his heart in this moment. Those sacrificed hopes for the future is the expectation that he would be able to name a firstborn son, raise him, and now he's faced with something totally different. And then he's faced with this question, what is he going to do with this woman that he loves and this child that is not his? I ran across something as I was preparing for worship this week. I hadn't noticed this before. I hope that you're reading the Christmas story, taking time, slowing down, reading it faithfully, slowly. Something I recognized this week, it's not so much what's in it, it's what's not in it. Joseph doesn't have one word that's recorded in the New Testament. Isn't that interesting? Not a single word. Again, Mary's got a song, a huge song. Joseph, nothing. No words. I mean, is there something that we're supposed to be picking up here that Joseph has to offer? No words, yet something profound from him? For some reason, I think of my grandfather when I think of Joseph's speechlessness. My grandfather's a man of very few words. But yet, it's okay. There's a comfort you find with him. He may only speak 4 or 5 sentences in an evening, but you're comfortable in that silence because you're comfortable with him. Do you know this? Someone who you may have this kind of relationship with? Quiet. Some silence. There's an old saying that those who speak do not know, those who know do not speak. But there's some wisdom in the silence. There's something cultivated in Joseph here that maybe we need to be seeking out in our own lives. Because in this Christmas story, Joseph really doesn't need his words, does he? I mean, his actions are louder than any words. His actions are terrifying to us because they set such high righteousness in mind that ours pales in comparison. Because all he has to do is say one word to the authorities, and the hopes of the future he could have again, and the fears of the present he need not deal with. It's a radical silence. Most men, a lesser man, probably would have pointed Mary out. I mean, it was a blight on his honor, but no, it's a radical silence. He's quiet. Those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak. And maybe there's something to this carpenter we should look at. And maybe it has something to do with being a carpenter. I am no carpenter. My hands are not fit to be a carpenter. Have you ever looked at your hands to see what they sell about you? They do. Take a quick look. Look at your hands. Pull them out. Your hands tell a story about you. I mean, think about what you can just look at. I can look at mine and see I've got a wedding ring on. I got some pen marks on my hands, which means I'm pretty clumsy. They're kind of soft and pasty. Not very, there's some calluses, but not really much to go boasting about. Your hands tell a story about your life, don't they? They can speak a lot about who you are. I bet Chad's got some rough hands he could show us. Yeah. There's this time of year, Charles Dickens has a novella that's huge. It's the Christmas Carols, Tiny Tim and Scrooge. And kids will be watching this time of year. When I think of Joseph, I think of another one of his stories. Charles Dickens wrote a book called Great Expectations. And there was a movie, it was turned into a movie several years back, and Robert De Niro plays a character in it. There's Finn. He's a young boy, and he comes across a convict who's Robert De Niro, who's escaped from prison. And Finn is really terrified to be in his presence, and he goes into his old habit of biting his fingernails. And the convict stops him. This convict who has seen the pains of the world and caused a lot himself. And the guy stops him and he says, "Don't do that. People say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, but no, it's the hands. The hands tell you who you are. The hands tell you who you are." There's something to that, isn't it? I experienced this a couple weeks ago when I went to my high school reunion. I was telling you about this. I saw an old friend who I hadn't seen in years. And we embraced when we saw each other and we shook hands. And in that moment, I learned more than almost any words could say. And I went to college after school and I was kind of embarrassed. My hands, again, were soft. And as y'all shake my hand almost every Sunday, you'll see your hands are really cold. They were cold then, too. And his hands were rough. From work, right after he had gotten out of school, he'd gone into stocking vending machines, and I was just embarrassed with myself in front of him. Our hands, they say something about the life we live. I imagine Joseph's hands might say something very similar to my friends, but even more. I mean, a carpenter, one hands were worn and splintered, and just from sanding and caressing wood. I mean, you got to think there's something to his hands, these hard hands. And if Spitz were here, he would tell us about this. You have to cultivate some patience when you're a carpenter, don't you? And in working with your hands, you're there for a long time. Your hands are busy, but your mind is free to work on yourself. I think Joseph may have some of this to offer, that during the time of his work, he can be working on himself as well. When young boys, I hope young boys are still joining Cub Scouts. in Cub Scouts, you have the Pinewood Derby. It was the biggest event for all Cub Scouts. You remember this, guys? The Pinewood Derby? And I remember my brother and I just sanding away at those little tiny box cars. And after a while, your hands would be red. And then after a while, you might get a couple of blisters, and you would be so proud of your blisters from working on these little box cars. Well, my brother and I, we got to go to our neighbor's house. He had all the wood cutting tools. He had the saws in the basement. His name was John Winter. I just think that's a perfect name for a carpenter. It's almost as good as Joseph. John Winter. It sounds like Chuck Norris almost, doesn't it? Well, he had all these tools in his basement. And we came to his basement and he saw our hands. And they were red, had a few blisters on them. And then he showed us his. And they were like old, worn leather. And I thought for a moment, or now, that looking back on that, and there's something to that in our life too. I mean, we may have these wounds and blisters, and we may think those define us, but if we just persevere, if we put our nose to the grindstone, if we have some patience and get through it, it may transform us into something with God's grace on the other side. From blistered hands to well-worn but loving hands. There's something to that. This is something Joseph's got to know in his heart of hearts as a carpenter. This kind of patience, this deep love. Transformed hands. They're a window to his soul. Hands that do all the talking. He need not words, does he? It's kind of life. And then Matthew says he is righteous. This is a different kind of righteousness. This isn't just simply righteousness of the law, because if that's the kind of righteousness, Mary's done with it. Mary would be stoned to death. No, his righteousness is defined by something more profound. It's shaped by God's mercy. This deep, loving compassion. This isn't rom-com kind of love, romance comedies. This is a deeper love, a divine kind of love that's on him. Something that supersedes the law. It's a love that puts his nose to the grindstone. That in the midst of the hopes and fears of all the years, something supersedes all of that. At the end of the day, his words, he doesn't need them. It's his hands, it's his deeds, it's his sacrifice to compassion, to mercy. There's something to be gleaned here, isn't there? Those who speak do not know. Those who know do not speak. Those who do not know speak, but those who know do not speak. There's something to that. That words are cheap, but actions are rich. And we need this today, right? Because words are everywhere. Opinion pages, Facebook, Twitter. I mean, we're surrounded by small words, and what we need is a capital W word, this deep compassion, this love made flesh. And we're talking about Jesus here, this love whose hands were torn open for our hands, that we may be shaped by this kind of love and compassion. It's God's mercy. Talk is cheap, but your hands, your actions, none of those tell you who you are. And I'm drawn to this last scene, Joseph and his dream, where he meets the Holy Spirit face to face. It's a big moment. And he's told that he will be the one who's going to care for Emmanuel. He is going to be the one who's going to care for the one who's God with us. His hopes of a different kind of future, or for his future, and his dreams are put on the sideline for another kind of dream. I mean, he may have had dreams of, again, naming his own son, having a son, having his own daughter. These were his dreams, right? And it's sometimes that we don't get our dreams or our hopes, do we? And I don't know if it offers a lot of consolation, but it does. And when I think about it, what if we're to stop and think about God's dream for our life, maybe? And what would happen here if we think about God's dream for us, that we too can be signs of this Emmanuel, that our hands, that our actions can be signs of God with us? It's grander than any dream we might have. It makes us whole. It saves us. It transforms us. We might have this kind of righteousness, this crazy kind of righteousness, because it's above any kind of law. It is the law of love. It transforms us. This kind of sign. Can we share in that kind of dream? this is the season. I think about long-distance relationships, Mary and Joseph, but this is the season where God is closing the long-distance relationship between him and us, isn't it? This is the season where God comes low in a feed trough. God with us. Cannot our own hands, our own actions speak to this God with us? That our actions and our souls may speak louder than words. That we too be signs of the Emmanuel, God with us.